And we want to know first and foremost that the one infallible teacher for every person is that which has been called the Holy Spirit within man, which is the whole Spirit in man, or the allness of the Spirit expressing as man. There is a depth within you, which is the reality of you. It may be called the Father in you, the Christ in you, the Holy Spirit in you, but actually it is you. It is the allness of you. And it is this of you which has been you from the beginning of time, the I am of you, which was you before Abraham was. It is this of you that is your true teacher. For it is that which is constantly seeking to call to remembrance into human consciousness that which you are. And so as we let go of struggle and strain and stress, we let this infinite self of us have its way. We let go of the human ego and let the divine in us be experienced and be fulfilled. We let go of all of the outer urge to find and to seek, and we let that in us which has never been lost come into fulfillment. And so we give thanks in this hour that each of us may experience something transcendent, something of a new perception of ourselves, something that will enable us to go forth from here and to see and yet see beyond sight, and to know and know beyond human wisdom, and thus to find a whole new perspective in life and a whole new attitude toward life. We give thanks for this day. And because of the great unity of life and of love, we give thanks for each other. Amen. Well, as I said, in this series of discussions, we're seeking to kind of relate for a while with some of the people that have been a great influence to me in my thinking. And I have especially omitted people involved in a particular discipline or order. So I haven't included in these series of my gurus people who in a particular religious order or people who in a particular philosophical stream. I've considered basically those who have been mostly transcendentalists, those who have been free in their observations and uncommitted and constantly on the quest. For this reason, we have not considered some of the so-called metaphysical greats of modern times. We're thinking of it in a very broad sense, and I'm only discussing people who I have selected arbitrarily, people who have been an influence to me, and whom I believe have had indirectly, if not directly, an influence on what is called a New Thought movement. Walt Whitman, whom we discussed today, I consider to be one of my very good friends. His work, Leaves of Grass, is a favorite source of relaxed living, and we always like, if possible, to suggest something of the work of the particular person we're dealing with, and Leaves of Grass is a work that you can find almost anywhere, and I certainly commend it to you. Walt Whitman was born in West Hills, Long Island in 1819 and died in Camden, New Jersey in 1892. He lived almost all of his life right around New York City. During the years of his life, he probably would have been considered much in the context that we consider the hippie today. He was almost that kind. He was a printer, an editor, a carpenter, and mostly a wanderer. He was a dreamer with the soul of a poet. He was an indolent worker. His job record left something to be desired. He was both an outcast and a beloved individual. He was both a rebel and an extreme patriot. He was a stranger and certainly an unbelievable combination of humility and egotism. But if all this seems rather odd, so was Walt Whitman rather odd in terms of finding any way to describe him. As we say, he was something of a rebel and a patriot. There are those today who consider him the poet and prophet of democracy. But this is not a commonly held attitude. In his early years of writing, he attracted very little favorable attention, except from Emerson. Emerson was probably his greatest fan, and if he achieved any note at all, it was probably because of Emerson's support. Emerson once said of his Leaves of Grass, "It is the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom that America has yet contributed." But despite the enthusiasm of Emerson, he was never in all his life completely accepted in literary circles, and he is not completely accepted today because of his controversial style, but mostly because of the inability of his critics and readers to sense his articulation of what Maurice Buck calls cosmic consciousness. Buck places Walt Whitman at the very head of his list in cosmic consciousness. He has sort of created an arbitrary listing of people in all literature throughout all time in terms of those who have had this cosmic sense of the universe and of life. And Buck says Walt Whitman is the best and the most perfect example the world so far has had of the cosmic sense. First, because he is par excellence the man who in modern times has written distinctly and at large from the point of view of cosmic consciousness, and who also has referred to its facts and phenomena more plainly and fully than any other writer, either ancient or modern. Now, these words, cosmic consciousness, are used a great deal, and perhaps they need a little bit of definition, though possibly they are beyond any apt definition. Cosmic consciousness is simply a universal consciousness, an awareness of wholeness, an awareness of the unity of life. It's the awareness that all mind, all love, all creativity are one. Now, we say that so often and relate to it in intellectual ways, but it's the feeling of this, the actual awareness of living and moving and having being in an infinite ocean of intelligence in which everything is a part of one whole. We live in it, and it lives in us, and even more, it lives as us. It unites all people as one, and it places the whole universe at man's disposal. A man the other day, very appreciative for something that I had done to him or for him, or had been some sort of an inspiration in his life, he said to me, putting his arms on my shoulder, "I give you the whole universe." And that was the kind of concept that would come from Walt Whitman. Jesus had this thought, which, as you recall, is expressed in his parable of the prodigal son, when the elder son was quite disturbed by the treatment given to the younger son. And the father said to the elder son, "Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine." All that I have is thine. Well, actually, this is something of the cosmic awareness of life, you see, that there is nothing really to get because you already have it. You're in it. You live in it. You can have no separation between people because they're all a part of one wholeness, one love. And the separation only exists in the thought of separation. Well, we say these things. This is certainly a part of the unity approach to life. But cosmic consciousness is a true consciousness of this, where you don't have to go through the affirmation that this is so. You know it is so. You feel it is so. But this cosmic awareness of life, when it is really articulated in its absolute sense, says some rather strange things. Strange to those of us who are caught up in the idea of man as having an ego, and whose ego gets in the way, and who should always tend to humble himself before people and before the world. Most of us have had that kind of a background. So when a man comes along and says very boldly, "I celebrate myself," of course the world says the man's an egotist. He's pointing attention to the human of him, you see. But Walt Whitman was talking of something different, because he knew that the only possible way that any person can achieve wholeness as a person is if he realizes that the wholeness is already himself, and he has to release it. He has to celebrate it. He's got to sing of it. He's got to give it expression. And so he said, I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, and every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. And then, of course, he sees this in the largest sense, which gives another insight, and a very important insight, into this cosmic awareness. And it helps us to find the kind of consciousness which is so often lacking, which we think of as sympathy or compassion, leading toward freedom and equality of other persons. He said, I embody all presences outlawed or suffering. Not a mutineer walks handcuffed to jail, but I'm handcuffed to him and walk by his side. Not a youngster is taken for larceny, but I go up too, and I am tried and sentenced. That's the cosmic sense, you see, the realization that I am a part of the whole, and the whole is part of me. And every great thing that is ever created, I am a part of that creation, and every sin that is ever committed, I am a part of that sin. There are two sides to it, you see. Remember, Jesus said, he expressed this cosmic sense beautifully. He said, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of these least, my brethren, ye have done it unto me. That's the cosmic consciousness that Whitman is talking about. And so, when this is cleared of all so-called religious haziness, which theology has thrown around the words, what he's saying, what Jesus said, and what Whitman is saying, is that humanity is one body, and he who in any way ministers in love to one part of the body has ministered to the whole. And that's a pretty hard thing to really grasp and to incorporate into our own experience. Because, you see, if it's true on one side, it's true on the other. As Whitman says, whoever degrades another degrades me, and whatever is done or said returns at last to me. In all men, he said, I see myself. Not one barley corn more, not one barley corn less. And the good or bad I say of them, I say of myself. Of course, this gives a new motivation to the idea of watching words. We've thought of that perhaps with another principle involved. But here he's saying that if you say something bad of anybody, you're really saying it of yourself, because you're degrading the whole and you're part of the whole. If you talk of any person as being undignified or inhuman or beastly, you are saying that man is beastly, and in a sense you're saying that you are beastly, because you're a part of this same wholeness. That's the cosmic awareness. So in talking about such a thing as freedom and equality, he says of equality, as if it harmed me, giving others the same chances and rights as myself, as if it were not indispensable to my own rights that others possess the same. That no man is ever really free while anyone is in bondage, in other words. Well, many, many poets and philosophers have had this insight, but this is a cosmic insight. And Jesus once said, in looking about at the great unity of life that is experienced throughout nature, he said, consider the lilies of the field, consider the birds of the air, consider all these things out here and how close they are and how at one they are with the creative process. And so then he was saying of man, why should you be disturbed? Why are you anxious? Why are you troubled when there is this great unifying essence? Whitman says, I think I could turn and live with animals. They do not sweat and whine about their condition. They do not lie awake in the dark and weep for their sin. Oh, to be self-balanced for contingencies. Oh, to confront the night, the storms, hunger, ridicule, accidents, and rebuffs as the trees and the animals do. It's a marvelous thought, and of course this kind of feeling only comes to a person who spends a good bit of time out of doors. A person who sits, as obviously Whitman did, watching the ocean tides come in and go out, watching the seasons, watching the birds, watching the flowers of the field. It was something, you see, of this concept of Thoreau that was expressed and experienced in Whitman. It's rather interesting. Thoreau came to many of the ideals that he had as a result of his studying of some of the teachings of the East. And Thoreau had worked up a whole reading list of various books and treatises and so forth, much of them of Eastern origin, that a person could read to get some background in his idealism. But Thoreau discovered that Whitman had come to this entirely intuitively, that he had had no reading whatever of any of the Eastern books. There was no Western translation of the Bhagavad Gita at that time. And so when Thoreau talked to him about this, Whitman was quite excited and interested, and so Thoreau gave him a set of reading lists that he might follow in this quest. But Thoreau was quite excited to find that here was a man who had come to this totally from within himself, without any outward influence. Whitman was a dreamer, but he was realistic too. He didn't say there's no evil, there's no suffering. Actually, as a newspaper man, he had seen a great deal of it. But he was a confirmed optimist. He felt that the good will out because he felt that evil was simply the frustration of the good, and the good was the only reality. He said, roaming in thought over the universe, I saw the little that is good steadily hastening toward immortality, and the vast that is evil I saw hastening to merge itself and become lost and dead. Now, there are not many people around now involved in the conditions in the world, in our society, who have that kind of pure attitude. Perhaps the only contemporary voice that reflects this is someone like Teilhard de Chardin in his evolution, moving toward the omega point, you see, where all the evil and the baser elements of life and of society are falling apart while man merges toward this point of cosmic unity. But Whitman had this tremendous feeling of the depth within man, of the divinity in man, his cosmic sense of the self, which was equal to all challenges and which simply needed to be celebrated and released. He had a pet phrase which I love, because I've always joked about the idea of sometimes people or conditions leaning on me. You know, when you're trying to stand up and you're trying to get something across or to fulfill some objectives, people have a sense of leaning on you, whether it be criticizing you or pushing against you or pulling at you or something or other. But he had a pet phrase that kind of reversed this whole thing. He said, I'm leaning up against myself strong. And he says, how good that is, leaning up against yourself. That's about the best any man can do when he needs support, to lean against yourself. You know, the old fundamentalists used to talk about leaning on the everlasting arms, and usually added leaning on Jesus, you see, which of course was a total misunderstanding of what the idea of the everlasting arms are. The everlasting arms are not the arms of Jesus at all, but they are the arms that supported Jesus. They are the arms of the transcendence of life that supports man, you see. So that Whitman, who realized that man is a focal point of this great universal essence, this great everlasting arm process, knew that he had to celebrate himself. He had to give birth constantly to this awareness of the divinity within him. So that when he felt a feeling of weakness, or when he felt oppression, or when he felt the difficulties of the world around him, as he said, I simply lean against myself. That self that I'm trying to celebrate, that I'm trying to release. That's the best thing any person can do when he needs support, is to lean up against himself. See, so often we carry over this old limited concept that the self is not good enough. This is the old idea that man comes into life empty and he goes out into life to be filled. And so he feels totally inadequate, and he hopes if he learns enough or reads enough or if people help him enough, then he's going to become more adequate. He feels totally unloved, but he feels if people love him and support him and say nice things to him, then he's going to find love, you see. But no one ever does on that quest, because it all is involved in the discovery of the self. In the self, in the deeper self within man, is all love, all intelligence, all life. It's already there. It's not to be found, it's to be released. This is why Browning talks about to open out a way whence the imprisoned splendor may escape, you see. So that Whitman constantly articulates this point, the importance of the celebration of the self. I sing of myself. And obviously the world doesn't understand that. The man's an egotist. But you're not singing of the human self, the inadequate self, you see. He's singing of the Christ self, singing of the deeper divinity within him, which is the reality of him. And that whenever a person is faltering or seeming to fail in the outer, it's because he is not releasing his own innate self. And so he says, I lean up against myself, which is a very dynamic and very meaningful way of saying that I lean on God. Because the only way I can lean on God is to lean on God as it is expressing in me. The old concept, of course, in leaning on God was God is outside of myself. And so if you said you were leaning on God, it usually meant you were leaning on somebody else. You were leaning on your church, or you were leaning on certain prayer rituals, or you were leaning on the priest, or leaning on a teacher, or leaning on a counselor, and you thought that was leaning on God, but it wasn't at all. It was weakening yourself. So every person must come to know that activity of God in him, which is in focus as him. And therefore, when we have a need, it's to be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that activity, which is manifesting in me as me, and lean on that, which is self-reliance. You see, as Emerson puts it. He believed that there's a great distinction between one's mere personality and the deeper self, and that the whole purpose of life is to unfold and evolve that deeper self into the personality, so that the outer expresses the inner. He felt, perhaps as few men before us since have felt consciously, that all men are divine, and all men will eventually, not perhaps in a lifetime as we think of lifetimes, but all men will eventually become God or gods. He came to know the greatness of man through his own self-analysis. And he said, and again, these are statements that are so often misunderstood, he said, I am larger and better than I thought. I did not know I held so much goodness. That's real reverence, you see. And yet, how often it could be misconstrued as egotism. I didn't know I held so much goodness. There is no way man can ever really come to understand what goodness is unless he sees it in himself. And when he sees it in himself, then he can appreciate it in others and in life around him. He said, I say no man has ever yet been half devout enough. None has ever yet adored or worshipped half enough. None has begun to think how divine he himself is and how certain the future is. He says, I am the acme of things accomplished, and I am the encloser of things to be. Which is but another way of saying the kingdom of God is within man. Not out somewhere, not something in the future. It's within man. It's to be unfolded. I am the acme of things accomplished. He says, there is that in me, I don't know what it is, but I know it is in me. It is not chaos or death. It is form, union, plan. It is eternal life. It is happiness. But again, it's in me. It's not in something that's going to come as a result of materialistic pursuits or relationships. It's already within me. He also had this tremendous insight into the timelessness of life. And of course, this is a part of this cosmic conscious awareness. He said there was never any more in inception than there is now, nor any more youth or age than there is now. And there will never be any more perfection than there is now, nor any more heaven or hell than there is now. It's all done. That's the finished kingdom. It's all here. And it's purely a matter of how we use it, what we make of it, how we see it, what we do with it. We don't change it. We simply accept it. He talks about the mystical relationship that each person has with this depth, which is timeless, and which, in a sense, is almost beyond articulation. So he seems sometimes almost embarrassed to try to put into words that which actually is beyond words. He says, a noiseless, patient spider I marked where on a little promontory it stood isolated, marked how to explore the vacant, vast surrounding. It launched forth filament out of itself, ever unreeling them, ever tirelessly speeding them. And you, O my soul, where you stand, surrounded in measureless oceans of space, ceaselessly musing, venturing, throwing, seeking the spheres to connect them, till the bridge you will need be formed, till the ductile anchor hold, till the gossamer thread you fling catch somewhere, O my soul. And this kind of puts in poetic form this idea of the law of unfoldment. And I don't know that there's a more apt illustration of the process of the releasement of the divine potential in man, expressing in forms of strength or ideas or companionship or whatever, than that illustration of the spider. You may recall I mentioned, I think in one of my books, the story of a man who brought this story to me one time when he had suddenly received a note in the evening when he was about to leave work. It had been there on his desk for many hours. He hadn't noticed it. A note that said that through some reshuffling of departments in his work that his job was being eliminated, and thereby this was his note of termination. And he was very shocked because he realized suddenly that he hadn't been paying too much attention to this idea of retirement. He was still pretty young for that. And yet, according to the attitudes of society today, he was really too young to retire, from the standpoint that he was too old to get another job. And yet he didn't have enough money to figure out any sort of a retirement plan for himself. So he was very, very nervous and upset and frightened by the experience. And he sat there for many, many hours, worried about it. And suddenly, as he looked on his desk, there was a little spider. And almost unconsciously and unthinkingly, he flicked the spider off. And the spider miraculously unfurled its own support, this gossamer thread that Whitman talks about, dangled in midair, and then slowly let itself down to the ground and then walked away. And he sat and meditated on this for a good while, and he felt that this was almost a divine revelation to him at that moment, because he found himself thinking, as Jesus pointed out, "Oh, ye of little faith, if this little spider could draw from within himself the means of his own support, then certainly you, who think of yourself as a child of God, should have within yourself the means of your support and security." So he sat meditating on this for many, many hours, and finally he left for home an entirely different man with a whole new insight. Things ultimately worked out for him, but the important thing was that he caught the realization then that the answer was within himself. And this is the thing that Whitman talks about, you see. When you lean up against yourself, then you don't run out here. You don't go desperately to the world. You don't look to people for guidance. You don't run here and there trying to find answers. You lean up against yourself. Pull away from the outer situations and stand tall and realize that within yourself is the answer. He says, "I know I am deathless. I know this orbit of mine cannot be swept by a carpenter's compass. I know I shall not pass like a child's curlicue cut with a burnt stick at night. I know I am august. I do not trouble my spirit to vindicate itself or be understood. I see that the elementary laws never apologize. I exist as I am. That is enough. If no other in the world be aware, I sit content. And if each and all be aware, I sit content. And whether I come to my own today, or in 10,000 or 10 million years, I can cheerfully take it now, or with equal cheerfulness, I can wait." This is an amazing insight into the unity of life in terms of time. No stress, no strain. That which is mine will come to me because it comes by right of consciousness. I don't have to fight for it. I don't have to struggle. I simply prepare the way and let it happen. He says the clock indicates the moment, but what does eternity indicate? How often we look at the clock, and we see the clock as a symbol of tension. Many people call the clock one of the evils of our society. The clock that we carry around with us, and that is forever telling us, like the little white rabbit in Alice in Wonderland, "I'm late, I'm late, I'm late, I'm late," because there's always things to be done, and I've always got just so much time in which to do it. The clock indicates the moment, But what does eternity indicate? And in the cosmic insight, of course, eternity indicates now as the only time. He says, we have thus far exhausted trillions of winters and summers, and there are trillions ahead and trillions ahead of them. That's putting it into a pretty broad context, isn't it? Births have brought us richness and variety, and other births will bring us richness and variety. And then is when he says, I am the acme of things accomplished, and I am an encloser of things to be. It all comes into focus within me, and now it's the focal point of all eternity. He says, rise after rise, bow the phantoms behind me. Afar down I see the huge first nothing. I know I was even then, which was Jesus saying, before Abraham was, I am. Way back there, before the huge first nothing, I was even there. Immense have been the preparations for me, faithful and friendly the arms that have helped me, cycles ferried my cradle, rowing and rowing like cheerful boatmen. He sees this eternal process. And of course here, as we've noted in all of the so-called transcendentalists that we've talked about in recent weeks, we've noted an acknowledgement of, if not an emotional involvement in the concept or experience of reincarnation, that it goes on and on and on. We can't think of it as just beginning now. He says, I tramp a perpetual journey. Come, listen, all. Not I, not anyone else can travel that road for you. You must travel it for yourself. It is not far. It is within reach. And so to you, life, I reckon you are the leavings of many deaths. No doubt I have died myself 10,000 times before. This day, before dawn, I ascended a hill and looked at the crowded heaven. And I said to my spirit, when we become the unfolders of those orbs, and the pleasure and knowledge of everything in them, shall we be filled and satisfied then? And my spirit said, no, we but level that lift to pass and continue beyond. You are also asking me questions, and I hear you, and I answer that I cannot answer. You must find out for yourself. And I'm sure many have asked this question because it seems to be the next logical point of consideration when we think of life as a continuous unfoldment. It's the case that we say, yes, life is growth, and every experience is a growth process, so I see this challenge, this difficulty as an experience of growth. And we say, I'm sure that something good is coming out of this, and I'm growing, and then so often we find ourselves in, but how long do you have to grow? You know, how long do you have to face these challenges? And when you see this long, continuous cycle, there's a thought of, when does it end? When do we get there? When will we come to that feeling that we've made it, or that we've fulfilled what it's all about? And that when will we come to a point where we are filled and satisfied? And of course then he goes on and says that we never really come to that point. We but level that lift to pass and continue beyond, which is a cosmic insight that goes beyond the limited perception that most of us want to read into it. Because most of us want to feel, you know, that when you do a job, eventually you'll get to the end of the road. Eventually you'll find the answer. He says, we but level that lift to pass and continue beyond. And beyond the beyond, and beyond the beyond. In other words, life is, as we mentioned last Sunday, life is not getting there, but life is constantly earning the right to be there. And wherever we are, we find that we're still earning the right to be in the next step, and in the next experience, and it goes on and on and on. And that's what life is. Life is not settling down. Life is not sitting and saying, well, I finally made it. Life is the eternal unfolding road, the open road, as Whitman himself refers to it as. And as he says, you ask me the questions, but I cannot answer, because you have to find out for yourself. Because Jesus expressed the same thought. You know, I've come to this point, but there are things I can't tell you. Why? Not because he wouldn't, but because he couldn't. But because there is that moment when no longer can we describe it or define it, because it goes beyond our experience. and on and on and on and on. This is the thing we see in Teilhard, you see, Teilhard de Chardin. This constantly unfolding process of the whole. Whitman has a rather interesting and somewhat iconoclastic view of religion, too, as most transcendentalists do. Some of them are a little bolder than others in talking about it. He says, there will soon be no more priests. Now, I'm sure he includes ministers, religious teachers of all kinds. Their work is done. They may wait a while, perhaps a generation or two, dropping off by degrees. A superior breed shall take their place. The gangs of cosmos and prophets en masse shall take their place. A new order shall arise, and they shall be the priests of man, and every man shall be his own priest. That's a rather startling concept to a religionist, to an ecclesiastic, to a person who places the center and the focus of religion in an institution. And yet every clear thinker within and without the church, all down through history, has held that concept, even though it may have been hushed up and rarely expressed. Because we've thought, you see, of religion as being centered in an institution, or in a body of theology, or in the great historic truths and so forth. But the ultimate is, every man shall be his own priest. And this is something of a concept that is articulated perhaps most clearly by the man we're going to talk about next week, which is a very dear friend of mine in a literary sense, Henry Drummond. He had this feeling that life is growth, and growth means challenge and change. He says, it is provided in the essence of things that from any fruition of success, no matter what, shall come forth something to make a greater struggle necessary. From any fruition of success, no matter what, shall come forth something to make a greater struggle necessary. And again, this is because life is this continuous cycle of unfoldment. What is life without stress? What is life without tension? Actually, we talk physically of muscle tone. We're all seeking to find relaxation, but not dissolution. If we totally dissolve the whole physical system and eliminate the muscle tone and the tension that makes a physical system go, then we're nothing but a blob of molecules, you see. And in the growth process, whether it be mentally or spiritually or psychologically or whatever, there is always this urge for growth and the means by which that growth is fulfilled. So that no matter what the success or the fruition of success, there will always be an unfolding something that will make a greater struggle necessary. This is evidence, for instance, in the way in which we have developed educational systems. With all the weaknesses and loopholes that we find in the educational concept, there is still this idea of progression. And thus it will always be. First the blade, then the ear, then the full grain in the ear. And the full grain in the ear, of course, gives birth to new grains, and on and on and on it goes, and on and on and on, down through all the cycles of eternity. And so it is in your life and mine. So that we go from the first grade to the second grade and the third grade, and every time we pass a course and get a diploma, we plunge into a whole new set of challenges and difficulties. And it's always more difficult. And so it is in life. Most of the unhappiness that we experience in life comes because we resist this process. It's not so much that things themselves make us unhappy as it is we resist the changing things. And that's why we're unhappy. And I have sort of coined a term, though it may well be that I've caught it from someone else, I don't know, that unhappiness actually comes because we try to unhappen things. We unhappen experiences. We work to change them, to resist them. A thing has happened. It's like the student out of the 6th grade, suddenly it happens that the 7th grade looms before him, and he resists it. So he's ready to drop out, you see. He unhappens it. It isn't there, but it is there. Not so much in an academic sense as the fact that there's another next larger context of life in the ever-expanding experience of unfoldment, and thus it will ever be. And there's no point in unhappening it or trying to do so. We move on. We're different, we're bigger, we're stronger, we're able to hold more, and so we have to hold more. We're able to carry more, so we have to carry more. And there's no letting down. There's no letting up, you see. That's what life is all about. Life will always demand of us greater performance, greater excellence. And there's no way in which we ever come to a point where we say, but life should let me rest. Well, in a sense, life in terms of man's experience of life will let you rest if you want. And the rest is in the interment, in the cemetery. But that's not a rest very long, you see, because through the eternal process of life, we go on. Only the body rests. But something of the spirit, something of the unfolding consciousness, which is this I am self of man, goes on and on and on and on. We say there's no rest for the wicked. Actually, that should be turned clear around. Only the wicked can rest. There's no rest for the divine, you see, because the divine is a process of growth and unfoldment and expression and expansion. Whitman says, great is the quality of truth in man. The quality of truth in man supports itself through all changes. It is inevitably in the man. He and it are in love and never leave each other. What is truth? Well, perhaps no one really knows. Truth is an ultimate. Truth is the final answer of an unfolding process that has no finality. So what is truth? He simply says that it is the inevitable in man and truth are in love and can never leave each other. Browning says truth is within ourselves. But what is it that is within ourselves? It's the ultimate of man, and the ultimate of that which man shall do, but it's not yet manifest what man shall do or be. So there's no way of knowing what truth really is. So anything that we announce as truth is but our perspective at that particular moment. He says the truth in man is no dictum. It is vital as eyesight. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And it's only in this purity of sight that we begin to see more broadly, more completely, more cosmically, and thus to see truth because we see from truth. But it's not a dictum, it's not a word, it's not a book. If there be any soul, there is truth. If there be man or woman, there is truth. If there be physical or moral, there is truth. If there be equilibrium or volition, there is truth. If there be things at all upon the earth, there is truth. And then he says, O truth of the earth, I am determined to press my way toward you. Sound your voice. I scale mountains or divine into the sea after you. So he is on this constant quest, you see, for the allness which truth is. Recognizing that at every step along the way, we only see part of the picture. No matter how wise we are, no matter how broad our experience, we can only see a small bit of it. And the quest, the urge, the press of the Spirit within us leads us on to the more. And we see this in Paul's 13th chapter, 1 Corinthians, for I see in part, but when that which is perfect is come, that which is in part shall be done away. And so there is this press on, press on, press on, for the allness which truth is. Think a good bit about this insight revealed by Walt Whitman. It's strange to the person who is engrossed in materialism and in purely the demonstration of things along life's way. It may not be a concept that very many people want to immerse themselves in totally. Perhaps few of us are ready for it. But as we said of Thoreau, it's so good to take a while to see things through the eyesight of a Thoreau or a Whitman, because these were the odd characters. These were the beatniks and the hippies of another time. They were ones who were rebels. They were radicals. They were innovators. But let's don't undersell that which they came to realize. Perhaps Whitman was far ahead of us all. The day will come, I believe, when Walt Whitman will be recognized as probably the great poet of America, and may well perhaps the greatest poet of all time. Though if there are any literary critics in the group today, you will challenge that, I'm sure. Because you say, what of Shakespeare? What of Browning? What of Keats? And on we go. But if we can see that a poet essentially is a person who touches the creative process and who lets it move him, who doesn't seek to use it, but lets it use him, and lets it express as it will, then perhaps Whitman must be acknowledged as a great poet, a great expresser of this creative process, not only because of the way in which it was done, but of that pure cosmic awareness that is the ultimate end product. There's much on Walt Whitman. I suggest certainly that you read Leaves of Grass. There are many other works that you can find available of Whitman. Truly an experience, not so much one to immediately seek to follow or emulate, but an experience, a reading adventure, and a thing like Thoreau's Walden that it is good occasionally to take up and indulge in, to give one a new perspective and to challenge his viewpoints. All right, well, let's just be still for a moment, and let's try to experience this concept of the cosmic. It can be as refreshing as dipping into cool waters on a warm summer day. Perhaps we can't take the waters with us. Maybe the sense of refreshment of the cool waters is but temporary and fleeting. But it's like the man who said, "I know the mountains are there because I saw them once. And I know the refreshment is there because I felt it for a moment. And I know there is this cosmic insight in life because for a moment I experienced it." And the great realization is that if we experience it in the moment, then we experience it in the allness of what we are. And no one can ever take that experience from us. So let's just be still for a moment. And stand, as it were, where this man stood when he said, "I sing of myself. I celebrate myself. I am the acme of things to be. I am the encloser of all that which has been done or will be done. I am that. I am the whole. I am the infinite. I am the truth. This is the depth of me. This is the reality of me." And it is in touching for a moment this depth or this reality that I sense and feel and experience the movement of spirit, the fulfillment of love, the freshness of healing life. And in this cosmic insight, I see myself as a part of the whole. I see the whole in the part. And I see all persons in this whole. And I see myself at one with all persons. So as Emerson put it, I am my brother, and my brother is me. So that suddenly there's no effort required to get along with people. I turn away from seeking to get along. And I simply seek to know oneness. And as I see from that depth in myself, I behold the depth or the divinity in the other. And there is love. We are in love with each other, in love together. And there is peace. And out of this comes freedom and justice and equality, not as political goals, not as ideals that perhaps we may be able to achieve, but as realities of the cosmic wholeness of life. And as we rest in this consciousness of cosmic wholeness, we rest in the awareness that freedom and equality and peace are not things of the future, They are realities now. I may not always know them. Society may not always fulfill them. But I simply frustrate myself, and society inhibits and restricts its own potential. But in this moment, I know this is the reality. And I know that there is peace and love between and among and within all persons and in myself. And thus I know that freedom is now. Freedom is me. Freedom is all persons. It is real. It is true. And so, acknowledging the blessing and the influence of the dreamer, Walt Whitman, we turn this day to the world out there, remembering as we go that the world out there is not an unreal world, nor is it a hopeless world. It's a world that is now what it can be, though it may take the dreamer to see it. It's a world that is now at peace, and we seek only to let Walt Whitman help us to see that peace, to feel the depth, the divinity within persons, to know our oneness with all good, and to know that all good is not a thing to be read in metaphysics, or an absolute to be reached for in Pollyanna hopefulness, but it is a reality that is now. We accept it, we claim it, we rejoice in it. And we rejoice in it as we rejoice in the depth of ourselves, which is to rejoice in ourselves. I celebrate myself, not in human ego, but in an affirmation of the truth of being. I celebrate myself. And though perhaps you've never let your lips form into such a statement, a realization, I urge you, I dare you now, to let those words be formed and to express that with conviction. I celebrate myself. Would you like to say that? I celebrate myself. This self of you is the God activity in you expressing as you. Lean often up against yourself. When you find yourself weakened, tense, struggling along in life's way, harassed by dissent and difficult personalities, lean up against yourself and feel that everlasting arm of your own God self laying hold of you, guiding you, directing you, blessing you, fulfilling you. And press on with the song of the open road, singing of yourself, rejoicing in yourself, giving thanks for yourself. And we give thanks for this consciousness. Amen. Now, as we usually do on Tuesday, we will not pass an offering. There's a basket by the door for those who may want to leave a gift as they depart. And we bless you. We're grateful you could join us. And next week we're going to continue in our talks with my gurus, considering another good friend, Henry Drummond. God bless you.